Welcome back. Welcome back. This is episode 3. Can you believe it, Rebecca?
No. Oh my goodness.
And believe it or not, this is the same thing. So, episode 3, we are going to Beyond the Womanist Classroom podcast, where we prioritize womanism for reading biblical texts. We prioritize the world in front of the text, the world we live where God meets us, and we prioritize justice, placing contemporary needs for justice and injustices that are happening or being inflicted upon our communities, placing that in conversation with the sacred text, because Black people, Black communities, human beings are themselves, ourselves, sacred texts as well to be read and to be interacted with one another. So my conversation partner again here is Miss Rebecca Christian, an educator in the Washington D.C. Area, and she is here asking great questions of me as we engage in conversation. Welcome back, Rebecca.
Welcome back. All right. Good to be here.
Okay, let's get this party started. Okay. So I want to go back to you, Rebecca. You left off one of the questions in episode 2 was struggling with what do I get out of the biblical text when we're reading or hearing sermons from the how are you empowered? It's one of the last stories that I lifted up was, or readings, was my reading of the Syrophoenician woman in Womanist, my book, Womanist, Sass, and Talkback, placing that story in conversation with Sandra Bland's story. And one of the things that allowed me to focus on was the power of her word and the power of the Syrophoenician woman's word, pointing out that God has placed power within each of us as human beings. There's power in our voice, there's power in our word. Now, when we confront injustice, whether it be a racial slur, I know you say this, racial slurs have a powerful negative impact on our psyche, on our spirits, on our beings. They're all connected. And so never underplay the significance of Jesus calling that woman a dog. And no, I reject scholars who say that she accepted that naming for herself. No, she did not. She used his language against him to say, you may call us, in a sense, dogs, but we deserve to eat too. Right. And it was it was the power of her word that God placed in her, basically, that resulted in the healing of her daughter. The outcome is, we cannot guarantee the outcome, but we do know that there is power in our voices and in our agency. So today I want to perhaps think about recently we all witnessed, right, the U.S. Supreme Court, the court that has been stacked for years in favor of conservative justices who claimed during their confirmation hearings or during their interviews that they would not overturn Roe v. Wade. And one of the first things they did when they had the numbers was to do exactly that thing, overturn U.S. Supreme Court precedents. And so they did that in the case of Dobbs v. Jackson recently. So what does it look like to place that decision and the impact on Black women and how poor Black women are already disproportionately impacted in terms of prenatal care, in terms of rape, in terms of mass incarceration, in terms of eviction. Matthew Desmond, in his book Evicted, says that while Black men are disproportionately in large numbers being incarcerated, Black women and their children are being turned out on the street, evicted. And then we receive the lowest wages disproportionately, our unemployment disproportionately is higher. We languish in poverty, and poverty is human made. And so to take a woman's choice away under those conditions uh, uh, is very even more heaps more injustices, oppression of and violence upon poor women and poor Black women. And so, what if we took this brief narrative that we just laid out as a result of Dobbs v. Jackson and placed it in conversation with the story in Matthew's gospel and the birth narratives of Jesus, who is identified as the king to be born, king of the Jews, whom Herod finds out about and wants to murder, who avoids murder, but there are many children in that story who Rachel weeps for unconsolably, who are murdered. God's son, the one to whom wise men bring gold and expensive gifts, and thus perhaps aided in the flight of his family with the baby and their survival. Right, the gold gifts that they bring, and the warnings that Joseph and the wise men receive, because of the human intervention of human beings and divine intervention, it seems, through human beings, that that child is saved. But the other children, 2 years old and under, are murdered by Herod. What does that say about human intervention? And what does that say about the divine or God as depicted in that story? Rebecca, comments, questions?
Well, one of the things I would say that, I mean, just looking at it and having read, some of the work that you put out, is that it kind of seemed like it's unjust, like, maybe putting more value on, one life as opposed to other. What makes those other lives that are being murdered? But they have no voice, whoever they are. I just noticed that there's no voice in terms of what happens to them or their families as a result of the grief that they might have experienced. So I can liken that, as you kind of said, to the experience of, parallel that to experience of people of African descent here, where, on the one hand, there are people who say that, okay, we're going to control and stop people from having a choice to have an abortion. But by the same token, um, those kids who do come into the world, sometimes the circumstances are very, very difficult, where they're coming into the world, but there are very few options and opportunities and resources for those families to sustain them and support healthy upbringing. So I just say that, the twofold, I think that the people that don't have a voice in that particular biblical story, wonder about them. And I think I had not really probably thought about that, because I think sometimes the way that, even though I know you're responsible for reading yourself, is presented is that they are kind of marginalized to the extent where you don't even really see them. You're so focused on this child who has to be protected. And why does a child to be protected, and not really thinking about the other kids? And I think that's part of what you speak about, the injustice, and making sure that you're looking at things with a critical lens when you're looking at reading the Bible. So you say that, why aren't they presented? Why isn't their story told? And I think that's a part of the significant evaluation of what you read. And also, I wanted to say one other word. I know that people talk about equity, right? So when
Mm-hmm.
you talk about equity, what does that mean when you're talking about the experiences of people in the Bible, and then also looking at today the experience of African American mothers of color, mothers of African descent, anyone who has identifies with brown skin that cannot be perceived as being anything other than one of those groups. What are your experiences like having a child? And even if you don't have a child, your experiences of seeing what happens to people when they don't have the resources, what our communities look like, and what can be done to change some of that, what agency we can use to shift some of that. Um, so that's kind of where I am at. But yeah, I had thought about, the other, they don't have a voice. Oh, this man's going around, he's killing all these kids.
Yes, right, right. Exactly.
But it's
Exactly.
like, okay, well, they're dying, but this one child is being saved, but they don't have a voice.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And we are okay with the text. Rachel weeping for her children and cannot be consoled. Okay, so we move on to the next verse, right? And so, yeah, so what is significant too, Rebecca, is so interesting is that at the time that they need to flee, right? Mary, Joseph with their baby, at the time they need to flee, they receive the resources to flee,
Mm,
right? They've given birth and now they have the resources to protect their child.
mhm, mhm.
That's not the case with poor black women, right? And
Yeah.
have we, and it shocks me too that most poor black women die more often from childbirth
Mhm,
than from abortion.
mhm,
And let that sink in. Die more black women.
mhm,
And if we think about it, I was shocked how high that number is for the Detroit metro area, right?
mhm,
Where about 52% of women with children live below poverty. We're not talking about those at the poverty line.
mhm,
We're not talking about those who hover below, above the poverty line, because they're still poor, right? They're still
mhm,
poor. And so the baby Jesus, because of his royalty, because of his potential to be a Messiah,
mhm,
is saved. But there are human beings who play a part, not only in attempting to his demise, but his saving, right? His saving. And angels interfere, according to the story. And so when we think about our present context and the predicament of black women, right? The fact that many are impoverished. Many don't have the money for childcare. Many have to choose between paying for food and housing. Housing is ridiculous. There's a shortage in affordable housing.
mhm,
Um, Many end up in housing that is not livable housing, but they pay a lot of money for housing that is not livable. I'm telling you all must get that book if you have not read it. Eviction by Desmond, Matthew Desmond, Desmond. We
mhm,
read that for a course recently focusing on homelessness and Luke's gospel.
mhm,
And just think about the many black children that go missing each year, right? We're talking about hundreds of thousands born into this world, go missing. Who is helping their parents look for them? Not the media.
mm,
Seldom do black children, black girls get that kind of attention. I remember my last year in Detroit, teaching in Detroit, and I remember hearing a story about a young girl, black girl, waiting on the public school bus during the daytime to go to school, snatched off the street
wow.
as she waited for the bus. I don't remember hearing another thing about that child. Children, not just in third world countries like some countries in Africa, who can't go to school safely without being violated or killed or whatever. This is also happening in the United States of America. And so, what does it say about this country wanting to force Black mothers, regardless of circumstances, to have children, to bring them into the world and say, once they're here, don't look for any help from us. Don't look for quality education. Don't look for free health care, quality health care. Because let me tell you also, even if the health care is free, there is no guarantee that it will be quality. We know there have been, there's research to show that we don't get the same quality care and the same compassion when it comes to health care. So all of this, a lack of quality of life, we're going to force you, even if you are raped, to have the child, even if you cannot take care of the child, even if you had birth control and the birth control did not help. I had a friend who had thought she'd finished with her children, had two. The last one is 13 years old. She had her tubes tied and burnt and tied and burnt. She had a child 13 years later from her husband. She could not be tied anytime soon. And she was not, she's not a millionaire or anywhere near it. So when we read, so it's very important to read these stories by privileging the world in front of the text, what's going on, because that context, our context, will encourage us to look more critically at the biblical text. Well, what about these children known as Rachel's children? Where's the human intervention that does not stop Herod, or divine intervention, human, divine through humans, that does not stop Herod from murdering these children, does not send their parents a warning? And I pray, God, that we do not say, come with some theological reason to see them as unworthy. That's what we will do quite often. Well, they must not have had faith, or they must not have had this, that, and the other, so they didn't deserve it. This is God's son. We're all God's sons. And one writer said, well, in the end, Jesus was crucified, right? But Jesus got to live his life to maturity. You know, in that time, 30 years old was maturity. So he died almost when a lot of people would die, right? But there are a lot of people, Black children, a lot of children in cemeteries who never got to realize, even a chance at realizing their potential in this life, their potential and purpose. So it is so important, I can't say it enough, for us to privilege the world in front of the text where we live, where God intervenes, we believe, where God is all powerful. Where is this all powerful God we talk about? That is demonstrated in the Bible. But God, that God is all powerful through frail, right? Imperfect human beings like us. They're human beings like us. It says that Joseph was afraid. Even when the angel told him to go, he can go home. I heard that his son or somebody's on the throne. I'm not going. I'll leave. I'll go the other way. And when I hear from God again, this is falsely says, I'm afraid I'm going to leave. And then I'll go over there. When I hear from God again, then I'll move. I'll go back home. Or I'll go to another city. Right? Fear did not keep God from helping that family. And is the depiction of God, the God we serve, that cares only about children with pedigree of royalty?
That's a good question. And I was just, looking what you mentioned about the mortality rates, and even in the Washington area where I am, they say
Mhm.
mortality rates for Black women in pregnancy are very, very high. That
Mhm.
90% of the deaths are attributed to Black women, in childbirth, as some either before, during, or after. Um, so, and again, going to the resources, where are the resources that will help intervene in this? And that means that if you have people for, and it could be pregnancy for a variety of reasons, maybe things beyond their control, maybe it was, you as you mentioned, incest, rape, it could be a lot of reasons that some of the, some could be, not, I'll just say, for circumstances that may not be the best, that that are things that certainly, they had sometimes in situation with very young children, or impregnated and things like that, where the circumstances may dictate some other options beyond coming to full term. And I think that people should have that choice. But I don't see, again, like you mentioned, the Bible, you have the kids who are being killed by the King Herod. And then, you have someone who's a protected class. But then today we have women who are, basically saying, well, if you get pregnant, wherever you may be on the age spectrum, you want to carry that child to term. Although there may be some options, it will probably be more layers of difficulty for
Mhm.
people to obtain them. So I'm wondering, uh, is there a plan for more resources for the for these communities, um, that may not have, the quality of life already, that would, you know provide them with the best opportunities for the children, or it could be medical reasons why they cannot, or are choosing not to carry the child to term. And even if a child is born with a disability or whatever, I mean, where are the resources, is what I'm saying. And again, like you illustrated in that story, that there were resources that one family got, but the other family didn't even get the message of a warning. So uh, I'm just wondering, kind of like, how does that play out now, looking at, as a Black woman, looking at the community, what do we do now? I mean, I know there are some options, but I'm just looking for, like we talked about, the justice resource list. What are some things that, because now I know people are saying that it's unlikely that this, decision will be overturned, at least in my lifetime. I understand, so what does that mean for future generations down the way, that maybe, that I may never see, that, what does it mean for them? So, but I think it definitely does shift, the space for Black women in terms of options, and redesign life for a lot of women who may be already struggling with difficult circumstances, whether it be just because whether you be single or married. The circumstances could, we, as you mentioned, we don't get the best health care sometimes,
Mhm. Mhm.
and because of that, if it risks your personhood, or there may be things that happen as a result, does that mean the outcomes for African and women of African descent are more, dire, or more, are we diminishing what we can contribute now because we're having lack of that option? But again, I like the idea of what you said about the resources, because I think that's key. So people who want to say we should do this, where are the resources? So I'm going to say that.
Mhm. Yes, no, yes, no. What can we do? We need to continually ask, what can we do as individuals, and what can we do as communities, whether it's a church community and so forth, right? We do need to think about, how can we step up? What agencies in our community are already doing something that we can partner with, or what new resource can we provide, right? I understand from someone that there's already been some networks provided to help people who need abortions to get to healthcare providers in states where it is not illegal. Can we be a new kind of underground railroad? Can your church do that for the community? There's also this talk about, well, Black children can be put into foster care. Black children age out of foster care more than other, just proportionally more than other children. And we also know the foster care system is overburdened and far from perfect. I fostered a child in the system for a while. And I pray to God, I understood that the family who she went to after me was going to adopt her, and I prayed that they did. But the foster care system is under burden. And then there's this thing of Black children and other vulnerable children being trafficked out of the foster care system. Right? What is it that we can do to be supportive of women and children put in this particular situation where their choice is now criminalized? Right? Their choice is taken away from them, and the possibility of them making the best choice from them is pre-criminalized. It is criminalized, right? What can we do? We need to ask ourselves that. What is it that we can do? What resources do we have? And what resources can we bring together? What is being done? Do our research, right? Each of us has to do our research. Our communities must do their research. What is it that our communities need? And what can we do? Because that's what it's going to boil down to. Until we got to keep. I don't think. Maybe I'm wrong, but sometimes I get this feeling that sometimes I'm like deep down, our vote will count, and we must vote. We need more truly democratic, not mansions, not the Joe Mansions of the world or the Christian cinemas, but we need more progressive Democrats, not undercover Republicans in the Democrat Party, but we need more senators who are truly progressive Democrats in the Senate and in the Congress, so that we can pass the Civil Rights Act, so that we can make Roe v. Wade the law of the land, as opposed, and therefore the Supreme Court can do what they want to do. But our vote does matter. So we must prepare to vote. Not voting should not be an option. You can feel hopeless, but don't act hopelessly. You can feel hopeless, but don't act in your hope as if you are hopeless. Particularly if you claim you serve a God who is all powerful. So God has put power in us. Power of voice, power to go places, power to have a say. And we fought hard for the right to vote. So we need to find out who's running and vote. Yes, Rebecca.
And I'm going to say, I'm thinking too, I think, to be honest, that some people are conflicted, feel conflicted by the decision. I know that there are some people who believe, well, we shouldn't have any abortion. Black women got to take more, better care of themselves, or they shouldn't be. And I will say that doesn't just come from I'll just say people who maybe believe in certain religious doctrines, and they could be Black, they just agree that it's a good thing. They see that's a good thing. But I don't know if people can project 10 years down the line what this looks like for our community. And I don't know, but there may be some people say that, oh, well, if you have faith and, you work hard, all these things will come to pass. Everything's going to be okay no matter what. And you have these kids and, and they'll put the blame back on, well, they shouldn't be doing that. And it goes back to being, cast on these women who, again, don't have a voice, who I will say, maybe don't have a voice. Maybe like the women in the story, they didn't have a voice. We're going to kill your kids. Okay. And you don't have a choice to kill your baby. But likewise now, you don't have a choice, but 10 years down the line, what does this look like? And I don't know that anybody cares about that, or maybe they don't, but I do hear calls that, it's all good. It's all right. We shouldn't have been doing that anyway. That's not our thing to do. And so how I question how you bring sensibilities to people to say that, you may not agree, but, there's different circumstances for why people make those choices. Sometimes it could be, medical. But not to have that voice anymore compounds problems that you don't know. And you already mentioned the foster care system. And some people can be exploiting that, not really caring for kids in a way that's appropriate. So what do you say to people who feel that, this is a good thing? Oh, this is,
yes.
not
Yeah, that's quite sad. I think, particularly, especially for persons who identify as God fearing persons, where we serve a God who tells us to care about our neighbors, right? And a lot of times, what we need is not what our neighbors need, right? What we don't need is sometimes what our neighbors need, right? And we need to honor. God honors our free will. We don't always make decisions that our parents or our friends want us to make, but hopefully we do the best at making the best decisions we think we can make for ourselves. Well, we should not take that away from other people. Something that God has given to each of us is autonomy, free will, right? But what this law does is take that away from people under threat of being criminalized, charged, imprisoned, right? And think about what will be the impact of. I truly believe there will also be an uptick of domestic violence.
Mhm.
We know many stories where even husbands murdered their wives because they didn't want the children. I mean, the children already here, not just children being born. We've had instances where white men murdered their pregnant wives and claimed it was a black man. Thank God, in many of the more modern instances, that it was found out that it was not a black man, but the husband who did it, right? So,
Mhm.
what is also the impact on domestic violence, right? People in marriages, people in relationships, right? Who may be using protection and taking care, right? We are human. Sexual attraction is human. Yes, we all. Many of us have made all kinds. Excuse me. Many of us have made all kinds of decisions contrary to the same judgments that we are standards we are using to judge other women, right? We just didn't get caught.
Mhm. Mhm.
Excuse me. And so a lot of times there's some also hypocrisy involved. But I think the bottom line is that we should um, care about our neighbors and what it is they may need and what they think is best for them, right? And care about the children more than beyond merely saying, oh, all children should come into the world. And but don't bring your children. You know, I've been in churches. We don't want those bad children in our churches. Don't bring your children around. We're not going to help you. You laid down and blah 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 blah. I think that's very callous, in my opinion, is very ungodlike. And I may have been years ago. I may have been in that camp years, many years ago. Right? Let me tell you. I remember being in a church as a Seventh Day Adventist. I was an elder in the church, and this was before I was a feminist or a womanist, right?
Mhm.
And a group of women wanted to go to a women's conference, and we were, on the board trying to decide whether we would help fund them go to this women's conference. And I remember my pastor at the time of the Seventh Day Adventist was Elder Robinson. Yes, and I remember saying, "Why do they need to go? Why do we need to pay for it? Why do they need to go?" And he could cut. He is very nice person, but he would just put it out there. And he said to me, he said, "Well, you may not need it, but what you don't need, somebody else may need." I
Mhm.
never forgot that. I have never. It stung at the moment, but it was true. I reflected on it, and I have lived my life by it ever since then. All right, what I may not need, the next woman may need, and
So I
she should be able to get her needs met in a wholesome, healthy, safe way.
So I think that then goes back to what you talked about context, right? So
Hmm.
that person's individual experience and what they deem appropriate for them at the time,
Hmm.
what would help them, what is their justice, so to speak. Now let me
Hmm.
ask you this. Now I'm going to bring this up because I know that I can hear some of my family members saying, well, people should be married anyway before they doing all of that stuff. So that's their fault that they got pregnant. I'm just saying, because that is the position of I think some of the some people who are in whether it be I would say churches, different things, they feel like that well she shouldn't be doing that, She should be married first. And I,
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
not married. I have kids. I mean, I'm no judgment, but I'm just saying because I think that that is something that becomes a cornerstone of people maybe trying to reinstate certain kinds of traditions or and different things that they think should be happening if you're in a space of spirituality or religion, that it should be happening if you're in a church. This is what you should be doing this. And if
Yes.
you're not
Yes.
that, and if you fall out of that parameter that you fall out the parameter that, then I don't know how you fit in. Because some of these people that I know that may be in communities where some of the students that I've taught, where there's very little positive things going on in some of these communities, and the opportunities look very, very grim. And for them to actually access some of these, let's say churches, whatever, I don't feel that they would feel welcome. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's what
Yes.
I get from, and I don't know how you diminish that divide to get them to, well, they should be married because
Mm-hmm.
this person's going to help me and I need help right now, and we're together, and I've been struggling, and I've also noticed too in some of the home visits I've done as a teacher is that uh, I had classrooms of maybe 15, 20 kids, and maybe 10 of those kids, their mothers had already passed away when they were very young.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the mortality rate of not just Black women in childbirth, but Black
Mm-hmm.
women even growing into old age in some of these
Mm-hmm.
communities is diminished.
Yes. Yes.
And so I'm
Yes.
like, yeah, and this is just my own quality. Just go into family. Your mother passed,
Mm-hmm.
her mother passed
Yeah.
away too.
Yeah.
So even the mothering itself of helping maybe women be able to make, maybe life choices that are, maybe going to put them up further ahead, it's not always there,
Mm-hmm.
and that's
Yes.
a void, that I noticed. So, you got some, maybe parent has a couple of kids already, but I say, well, my mom passed away, and this is common.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so many, I think, layers before, when people talk about the judgment, it's a lot of layers. Um,
Yes. Yes.
so anyway, I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna let you respond to that, but yeah.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I'm gonna respond. Then we have to wrap it up because we're going on 40 minutes. But this topic is coming up, Rebecca. Pastor Isaiah Petway raised this question in the Facebook group. He wants us to address marriage, sex, and sin. And so that is on our schedule. So I'll just say a couple brief things, but it's coming up. It is coming up. We're gonna try to tackle that. Probably gonna take 3 sessions. But in my experience, let me say this: many of us, right? And I'm not in the judgmental camp, right? But I'm gonna put myself in this group, right? Many of us have dodged a bullet, but we are, but we are very judgmental. Perhaps our indoctrination in church encourages us to very judgmental towards persons, particularly women. Men, they go about that for the most part, towards women who have babies out of wedlock or who become pregnant out of wedlock. A lot of judgment, yes. And I've noticed a lot of that judgment will come from women when you hear their stories who have had babies out of wedlock. And so that's our hypocrisy to me right there. But yes, so we need to talk about this. So because a woman has a child out of wedlock, does that mean that she should have no choice over her healthcare decisions? I hope the answer is no, that of course she should have choices. Oh, what kind of, do we really serve a compassionate God or one that is more judgmental like we are?
Mm.
A lot of times the God we serve, the God we serve is the God who is compassionate towards us, but not towards the other. It is a God who gives us the power to be judgmental and less compassionate. But that is not the God we claim. that shows up for us. It is a very compassionate God, but we don't want that kind of God for others. That reminds me of the story of Jonah when God said, "Go preach to Ninevites, right, and tell them to repent." Well, what happens when they repent? Jonah mad. Hey, I went down here to preach judgment. Now you need to rain down judgment on these folks. But see, because they decided they want to now do something different. The baby's already out the womb. But God has compassion, right? God has compassion. That's the kind of God I see, who is compassionate, not judgmental, because my judgment that you shouldn't have done this and blah blah. First of all, you don't know the circumstances, right? And so forth. And so I think we should err on the side of compassion and love, not the need to be right, for our judgments to be right and to be harsh, because that's not the kind of God I serve. Is one of compassion, and we need to be the compassionate persons that we want God to be towards us. All right. So we were in there. Thank you so much again, Rebecca, for such a lively conversation. We will be back with episode 4, and that discussion is coming about sin, marriage, and sex. Don't ask Paul.